The blizzard came down from the mountains like a white wall of death, and by the time it passed 3 days later, Grace Anderson's husband and 2 sons lay frozen beneath the collapsed barn. Her cattle were scattered corpses across the valley, and her homestead was nothing but splinters and snow. She stood in the aftermath, 24 years old and hollow as a gutted tree, staring at the 3 mounds of earth she had somehow managed to dig in the half-frozen ground. Her hands were raw and bleeding through the makeshift bandages. Her face wind burned beyond recognition, and her eyes held the kind of emptiness that comes when grief is too large to fit inside a single human heart. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly in every direction, white and pitiless under a pale March sun that gave light but no warmth. Grace had nothing left but the clothes on her back, and the wedding ring she kept touching like a talisman that had already failed her. The homestead papers had blown away in the storm or were buried under snow somewhere. Not that it mattered. Without livestock, without buildings, without seeds for spring planting, the land was just a pretty place to starve. She had been walking for 2 days when the horse appeared, a big roan gelding with a rider who sat easy in the saddle despite the cold. Grace had no idea where she was going, only that staying meant dying, and moving meant maybe dying a little slower. Her feet were numb in her boots, and she had stopped shivering hours ago, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a bad sign. "Madam." The voice cut through the wind, deep and careful. "Madam, you cannot keep walking. There is nothing for 30 miles in that direction except more snow and the Canadian border." Grace turned slowly, her body moving like it belonged to someone else. The man on the horse was young, maybe 28 or 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore a heavy coat and a hat pulled low, and his face had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outside. There was something in his expression that was not pity exactly, but understanding, which was somehow worse. "I am fine," Grace said, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, distant and cracked. "No, madam, you are not." The man dismounted in one smooth motion, leading his horse toward her. "My name is Callum Bennett. I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here. You need to get warm and eat something before you freeze to death out here. I do not need charity." Even as Grace said it, her legs buckled, and only the man's quick reflexes kept her from pitching face first into the snow. His hands were strong but gentle, steadying her without clutching. "It is not charity if you are going to work for it," Callum said quietly. "I lost my cook and housekeeper to pneumonia last month, and the place is falling apart. You help me get through spring roundup and planting season, and we will call it even. After that, you can decide what you want to do." Grace wanted to argue, but the cold was in her bones now, that deep cold that makes thinking impossible. She let him help her onto his horse, and he swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. The horse started moving, and Grace closed her eyes, letting herself drift in and out of consciousness as the animal's warmth seeped into her frozen body. She woke in a bed, which confused her for several long minutes. The room was small but clean, with log walls chinked tight against the cold and a window that showed twilight coming on purple and gold. Someone had undressed her and put her in a flannel nightgown that was far too large, and there were heated bricks wrapped in cloth at her feet. Her hands were bandaged properly now, and the fierce burning in her fingers and toes told her they were coming back to life. Grace sat up slowly, inventory taking her body. Everything hurt, which meant she was still alive. The grief hit her then, sudden and sharp as a knife between the ribs. Thomas was dead. Little James, who had just turned 7. Baby Michael, who was 5 and still sucked his thumb when he thought no one was looking. All of them gone, and she had survived, which felt like the worst betrayal of all. She was still crying silently when the door opened, and Callum Bennett came in carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw her face and something flickered in his eyes, but he did not say anything about her tears. He just set the tray on the small table by the bed and stepped back, giving her space. "There is soup and bread," he said. "The clothes you were wearing are being cleaned, but I put some things that belonged to my sister in the dresser there. She left them when she got married and moved to California. You are about the same size." "I should not be here," Grace said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "You do not know me. You do not know anything about me." "I know the storm hit the homesteads up in the northern valley pretty hard," Callum said quietly. "I know I found you walking south with no supplies and no horse. I know grief when I see it. That is all I need to know right now." Grace looked at him properly for the first time. He had a good face, honest and open, with the kind of eyes that looked at you directly without making you feel examined. There was a scar through his left eyebrow and another on his jaw, small marks of a hard life lived carefully. He stood like a man comfortable in his own skin, not tall but solid, with the lean strength that came from real work rather than show. "The storm took my husband and my boys," Grace said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that hurt worse than anything physical. "The barn collapsed on them. I dug for hours, but by the time I got to them, they were already gone. Thomas was 32, James was 7, Michael was 5. Callum was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry. There are not any words that make that better, but I am sorry." "I have nothing left," Grace continued, the words spilling out now like water from a broken dam. "The cattle are dead. The house is gone. I do not even have the land papers anymore. Everything I had is just gone, and I do not know what I am supposed to do now. I do not know how to be the person who survived when they did not." "You do the next thing," Callum said simply. "You eat the soup. You sleep. You get up tomorrow and do whatever comes next. You keep doing that until it stops feeling impossible. And if it never stops feeling impossible, then you do it anyway." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I meant what I said about needing help here. It is not charity. I genuinely need someone to cook and help manage the house. Spring roundup starts in a few weeks, and I will have 6 hired hands living in the bunkhouse. Someone needs to feed them and keep things running. If you want the work, it is yours." Grace nodded slowly. "I will work. I will earn my keep. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden, Mrs. Anderson. You are a woman who got hit by something terrible and is still standing. That takes strength." Callum tipped his head slightly. "Eat the soup. Rest. We can talk more in the morning." After he left, Grace ate the soup mechanically, tasting nothing but forcing herself to swallow. The bread was good, fresh baked and still slightly warm, and she ate that too, knowing her body needed fuel even if her mind could not care. Then she lay back down in the bed that smelled like lye soap and sunshine, and she stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged her back under. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Grace forced herself out of bed despite the weight of grief that made every movement feel like walking through deep water. She learned the layout of the ranch house, a solid structure built from local timber with a stone fireplace big enough to stand in and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. The kitchen was well equipped, better than her homestead had been, with a good cast iron stove and proper storage. The root cellar was still full of preserved vegetables and salted meat, testament to the previous housekeeper's skill. Callum kept his distance, respectful and careful, but he was there in the small ways that mattered. He showed her where things were stored. He brought in firewood without being asked. He mentioned, casually, that he had ridden up to her homestead to see if anything could be salvaged, and had found the land papers in what remained of the house. He had brought them back, along with a small wooden box that had been in the root cellar, protected from the worst of the storm. Grace opened the box with shaking hands and found her grandmother's silver locket, Thomas's pocket watch, and a small carved wooden horse that James had made for Michael last Christmas. She clutched these remnants and wept until there was nothing left inside her but empty space. But empty space could be filled with motion, so Grace threw herself into work. She cooked for Callum with a fierce determination, making bread and stews and pies from the supplies in the root cellar. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and beating rugs until her arms ached. She sorted through the sisters' abandoned clothes and altered them to fit better, grateful for work her hands could do while her mind wandered the dark places she could not avoid. Callum was a quiet presence in the house, respectful of her grief but not tiptoeing around it. He ate the meals she prepared and thanked her genuinely. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle he was running and the plans he had for expansion. He spoke matter-of-factly about the work that needed doing, treating her like a partner in the enterprise rather than hired help, which Grace found both strange and oddly comforting. "I have been running this place for 3 years," Callum said one evening over dinner, the first real conversation they had shared. "My father left it to me when he died. It is not much, maybe 300 head of cattle and 600 acres of grazing land, but it is solid. Good water, good grass, and I own it outright. No bank loans hanging over my head." "That is more than most people have," Grace said quietly. She was eating better now, her body remembering how to want food even when her spirit did not. "Maybe. But it is lonely work, doing it all alone. My sister married a merchant and moved to San Francisco. She likes city life better than this." Callum smiled slightly. "I cannot say I understand the appeal, but she is happy, which is what matters. What about your mother? Died giving birth to my sister. I was 8. Callum's voice was matter-of-fact, but Grace heard the old grief underneath. "My father raised us the best he could. He was a good man, hard but fair, taught me everything I know about ranching." Grace nodded, pushing food around her plate. "Thomas and I had the homestead for 6 years. We built it from nothing, just the 2 of us and then the boys when they got old enough to help. It was not much, but it was ours. We were going to expand this year, get more cattle, maybe build a bigger house. And then the storm came and now none of it matters." "It matters," Callum said firmly. "It matters that you built something. It matters that you loved them and they knew it. The storm took a lot from you, but it cannot take that." Grace looked up at him, this strange man who had pulled her from the snow and given her a place to land. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me." "I could be anyone. I know enough. I know you were walking south in a blizzard rather than giving up. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever hired. I know you loved your family enough that losing them nearly killed you." Callum met her eyes directly. "I know what it is like to lose people. I know what it is like to have to keep going when you do not want to. Maybe I am doing this because someone should have been there to help me when I needed it, and this is my chance to do better." Something in Grace's chest, some tight knot she had not even known was there, loosened slightly. "Thank you. I do not think I have said that yet, but thank you. You saved my life." "You are saving it, Mrs. Anderson. I just gave you a place to do it." The hired hands arrived 2 weeks later, 6 rough men who had spent the winter in town and were ready to work. They were a mixed group, weathered cowboys who had been working cattle since they could sit a horse. Callum introduced Grace simply as his housekeeper, and if any of the men had opinions about a young widow working on a bachelor's ranch, they were smart enough to keep it to themselves. Grace fell into the rhythm of feeding them, making huge batches of biscuits and gravy for breakfast, sandwiches and coffee for lunch taken out to wherever they were working. and hearty dinners of stew or roast or whatever she could make stretch to feed 8 people. It was exhausting work, but she welcomed the exhaustion. It meant she fell into bed too tired to think, too tired to dream about the sound of the barn collapsing or the terrible silence when she finally dug through to where her family lay. Callum worked alongside his men, up before dawn and often not back until after dark. Grace watched him when she thought he would not notice, seeing how he moved through the world with a quiet competence that reminded her painfully of Thomas. But Callum was different too, gentler somehow, more patient. He never raised his voice, never used his size to intimidate. When one of the younger hands made a mistake that spooked the cattle, Callum just showed him how to do it better, calm and practical. "He is a good boss," one of the older hands, a man named Pete, told Grace when she brought lunch out to where they were mending fence. "Fair wages, fair treatment. I have worked for a lot worse." Grace nodded, pouring coffee from the big pot she had hauled out in the wagon. "He seems like a decent man. More than decent. Last year, one of the boys got hurt bad, thrown from a horse and broke his leg in 3 places. Callum paid for the doctor and kept paying his wages the whole time he was laid up. Didn't have to do that, but he did anyway." Pete accepted the coffee gratefully. "This is good coffee, madam, best we have had in years." It was a small compliment, but it warmed something in Grace that had been cold for a long time. She was useful here. She had purpose. It was not the same as having her family, would never be the same, but it was something to hold on to. Spring crept slowly into the Montana territory, the snow melting to reveal brown grass that would green up once the weather warmed properly. The cattle were thin after the hard winter but recovering, and Callum spent long days riding the range, checking on them and planning where to graze them for the best growth. Grace often rode out with supplies, and Callum started teaching her about the ranch, pointing out landmarks and boundaries, explaining his decisions. "Why are you telling me all this?" Grace asked one afternoon. They were sitting on a ridge overlooking the valley, eating the lunch she had brought while the horses grazed nearby. Callum was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "Because you should know. You live here, you work here. You should understand how it all fits together." "But I am just the housekeeper." "Are you?" Callum turned to look at her directly. "Because from where I am sitting, you are the person who keeps this whole operation running. The men are happy because they are well fed. The house is organized. You have started a garden plot. You reorganized the root cellar so we can actually find things. You are not just the housekeeper, Mrs. Anderson. You are part of this place now." Grace felt something flutter in her chest, something that might have been hope or fear or both mixed together. "I do not know what I am supposed to do with that. You do not have to do anything with it. I am just telling you how I see it." Callum stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "We should head back. Storm coming in tonight, you can smell it on the wind." He was right about the storm, but it was rain this time instead of snow. A hard spring rain that drummed on the roof and turned the world green almost overnight. Grace stood at the kitchen window, watching water run down the glass, and felt something inside her shift. 3 months ago, she had lost everything. Now she had a roof over her head, work that mattered, and a man who treated her like a person rather than a tragedy. She turned from the window to find Callum standing in the doorway, soaked to the skin from checking on the horses. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death," Grace said, automatically shifting into caretaker mode. "I will heat water for a bath. I am fine, just wet." But Callum was shivering slightly, and Grace gave him a look that had him raising his hands in surrender. All right. A bath sounds good." Grace heated water on the stove and filled the big tin tub in the bathing room, a small addition off the kitchen that she had come to appreciate. She left clean clothes and towels, then retreated to give Callum privacy. But as she moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, she found herself thinking about him in ways that made her feel guilty and confused. She had loved Thomas, still loved him, would always love him. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still alive, and apparently still capable of noticing that Callum Bennett was an attractive man with kind eyes and gentle hands. It felt like a betrayal, too soon, wrong in some fundamental way. But then she remembered what Thomas had said once, late at night when they were talking about the future. "If something happens to me, Grace, promise me you will not spend your whole life alone. You are too young, too full of life. Find someone good and be happy. That is all I would want for you." She had promised, never thinking she would have to keep that promise. But here she was, and here was Callum, and Grace did not know what to do with the feelings that were starting to grow in the space where grief had taken up all the room. Callum emerged from the bathing room in clean clothes, his hair damp and curling slightly at the ends. He looked younger somehow, less weathered, and Grace had to look away from the smile he gave her. "That was exactly what I needed. Thank you." Callum settled at the table, watching her work. "Can I ask you something personal, I suppose? What are you going to do when spring roundup is over? You have been here almost 2 months now. You have earned enough to get yourself set up somewhere if you want. Buy passage to wherever you have family or stake a new claim somewhere." Grace stopped stirring the pot on the stove, her hand going still. She had not let herself think about the future beyond the next day, the next meal, the next task. The idea of leaving the ranch, of going somewhere else and starting over alone, made her feel hollow and panicked in equal measure. "I do not have family," she said quietly. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my grandmother and she passed 5 years ago. Thomas was an orphan. It was just us and the boys, and now it is just me. I am sorry. I did not mean to bring up painful things." "Everything is painful right now," Grace said honestly. "But to answer your question, I do not know what I am going to do. I have not let myself think that far ahead. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into nothing." Callum was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was weighing each word. "What if you stayed? Not as hired help, but as a partner. This ranch needs more than I can give it alone. You have proven you can run a household and manage complicated logistics. With you handling things here, I could expand the operation, maybe get into horse breeding like I've been wanting to do. We could build this into something really solid." Grace turned to face him fully, her heart hammering in her chest. "What are you saying exactly?" "I am saying I trust you. I am saying you work harder than anyone I have ever known. I am saying this place runs better with you here than it ever has before." Callum met her eyes steadily. "I am saying I would rather have you as a partner than lose you, because you think you are just the housekeeper. Partners." Grace tested the word, turning it over in her mind. It was not a proposal, not exactly, but it was something. An offer of belonging, of a future that was not just survival but actual living. "Partners," Callum confirmed. "Equal say in how things run. Shared profits. Your name on the deed if you want it. I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give, Mrs. Anderson. I am just asking you to stay." Grace thought about the homestead, about the life she had built with Thomas that was gone now. She thought about her boys, about the ache that never really went away. But she also thought about the last 2 months, about the satisfaction of work well done and the quiet comfort of Callum's presence. She thought about laughter slowly returning, about moments when she forgot to be sad, and how that used to make her feel guilty but was starting to feel like healing instead. "All right," Grace said finally. "I will stay, as a partner, but I want it in writing, legal and proper. I have lost everything once. I will not do it again." "Fair enough. We will go into town tomorrow and have the papers drawn up." Callum smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look happy in a way Grace had not seen before. "You will not regret this, Grace. We are going to build something good here." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about it felt significant, like a door opening onto a new path. Grace turned back to the stove, hiding her own smile in the steam rising from the pot. The trip into town was Grace's first time leaving the ranch since she had arrived. They took the wagon, with Callum driving and Grace beside him, watching the landscape roll past. The town was called Sierra Vista, a small settlement in the northern part of the Montana Territory that served the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. It had the usual collection of buildings: a general store, a saloon, a church, a tiny schoolhouse, and a land office that doubled as a lawyer's office for drawing up contracts. The lawyer was a thin man named Mr. Abernathy, who looked at Grace with open curiosity, but had the sense not to ask too many questions. Callum explained what they wanted simply and clearly: a partnership agreement that gave Grace Anderson equal ownership of the Bennett Ranch and equal say in all decisions regarding its operation. "This is highly unusual," Mr. Abernathy said, peering at them over his spectacles. "You understand what you are proposing, Mr. Bennett. You would be giving away half of everything you own." "I understand perfectly. Draw up the papers." Callum's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "And you, Mrs. Anderson, you understand you would be taking on half the debts as well, should any arise. This is not simply a gift, but a full partnership with all the responsibilities that entails." "I understand," Grace said clearly, "and I want it in writing with both our names on the deed to the property. Legal and binding." Mr. Abernathy sighed but began drafting the documents. It took over an hour, with him stopping periodically to read passages aloud and ensure they both understood what they were agreeing to. Finally, the papers were ready, official and stamped, and Grace signed her name in careful script right below Callum's bold signature. "Well then," Mr. Abernathy said, shaking his head slightly, "I suppose that makes you two business partners. Quite unusual, but everything appears to be in order. I will file these with the territorial office." Walking back to the wagon, Grace felt strange, unmoored. She owned property again. She had standing, legal protection, a future beyond just day-to-day survival. It should have felt good, but instead she felt overwhelmed, like the weight of this new responsibility might crush her. Callum must have sensed her mood because he suggested stopping at the general store before heading back. "You need proper clothes for ranch work. Those dresses of my sister's are fine for housework, but you cannot ride or work in the garden wearing them. And before you argue, it is a business expense. My partner needs proper equipment." Grace let him guide her into the store, where the proprietor's wife helped her select several pairs of sturdy trousers, work shirts, a good heavy coat, and proper riding boots. Callum also insisted on a hat to keep the sun off her face, and Grace found herself accepting it all with numb gratitude. It had been so long since someone took care of her that she had forgotten what it felt like. They loaded the supplies into the wagon along with staples for the house and headed back toward the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Grace watched the colors shift and change as the wagon rolled along the rutted road. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence, "for all of this, for everything. I know I have said it before, but I do not think you understand what it means to me." "I think I do," Callum said quietly. "When my father died, I felt lost. I had the ranch, but I did not know how to manage it without him. I made mistakes, nearly lost everything my first year. But I kept going because I did not have any other choice, and eventually it got easier. You are in the lost part right now, but it will get easier, Grace. I promise you that. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode in silence for a while, the horses keeping a steady pace, the wagon wheels creaking in a rhythm that was almost soothing. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you do it? Make me a partner instead of just keeping me on as help?" "You did not have to do that. Most men would not have done that." Callum was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, careful. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you deserve to have security after what you have been through. Because I meant what I said about this place running better with you here, and I did not want you to leave when you realized you could." He paused, then added, "And because I like having you here. I like talking to you at dinner. I like how the house feels alive now instead of empty. I like who I am when you are around." Grace's breath caught in her chest. It was not a declaration of love, but it was honest and real, and somehow that mattered more. "I like being here," she admitted quietly. "I feel guilty about it sometimes, like I should still be grieving too hard to notice anything good. But then I remember that Thomas would want me to be happy. He always wanted that for me. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. He was kind and hardworking, and he loved the boys so much." Grace's voice thickened with tears, but she kept talking. "But he is gone, and I am here, and I am starting to think that maybe that is all right. Maybe I am allowed to keep living even though they cannot." "You are allowed," Callum said firmly. "You are allowed to be happy and sad at the same time. You are allowed to build a new life without forgetting the old one. Grief does not mean you have to stop living, Grace. It just means you carry them with you while you do." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, grateful for the gathering darkness that hid her tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I am not wise. I am just someone who has lost people too. You learn things when you go through hard times." Callum glanced at her, his expression gentle in the fading light. "But I will tell you what I learned. Life is too short and too hard to spend it alone if you do not have to. We are better together than we are separate. That is not weakness. That is just truth." They arrived back at the ranch as full darkness fell, and Grace found herself reluctant to leave the comfortable cocoon of the wagon. But there were chores to do, animals to feed, a life to live. She climbed down with Callum's help, his hand warm and solid on her arm, and together they unloaded the supplies and put the horses away for the night. The hired hands were in the bunkhouse, and the main house was quiet as Grace, and Callum moved through it, lighting lamps and stoking the fire. It felt domestic, peaceful, and Grace let herself sink into the routine of it. She made a simple dinner of bread and cheese and leftover stew, and they ate at the kitchen table, talking about plans for the ranch, about the garden Grace wanted to expand, about Callum's idea to start breeding horses. "I have been thinking about it for 2 years now," Callum said, enthusiasm clear in his voice. "There is a demand for good working horses, and we have the grazing land for it. We could start small, maybe get a quality mare or two and a good stud and build from there." "How much would that cost?" Grace asked, her practical side engaging. "More than I have saved right now, but maybe by next year if we have a good season, or we could take a small loan, though I would rather not if we can avoid it." Callum looked at her seriously. "What do you think? You are a partner now. You get a say in these decisions." Grace considered it, turning the idea over in her mind. "I think it is a good diversification. If cattle prices drop or we have another bad winter, we would have another income stream. But we should not overextend. Start with one good mare and see how it goes before we invest more." "That is smart. Conservative but not too cautious." Callum grinned. See, I told you I needed a partner. You think about things differently than I do. They cleaned up together after dinner, moving around the kitchen in an easy rhythm that felt practiced despite being new. Grace washed while Callum dried, and she found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way his shoulder brushed hers when he reached for a plate, the warmth of him in the small space. "I should go check on the horses one more time," Callum said when they finished. "Make sure everyone is settled for the night." "I will come with you," Grace said, surprising herself. But she was not ready for the evening to end, not ready to be alone with her thoughts yet. They walked out to the barn together, the night air cool but not cold, full of the smell of new grass and wet earth. The horses whickered softly at their approach, familiar and content. Callum moved among them with practiced ease, checking water buckets and running his hands over each animal to check for injuries or illness. "I love this time of day," he said quietly. "Everything is settled and quiet. All the work is done. It is just peaceful." Grace nodded, understanding. She stood in the barn doorway, looking up at the stars that were impossibly bright out here, away from any town lights. "I used to stand outside like this at the homestead," she said. "Thomas would come out and stand with me and we would just be quiet together. I miss that. I miss having someone who understood that silence could be comfortable instead of lonely." Callum came to stand beside her, close but not touching. "I understand that. Silence with the right person is better than conversation with the wrong one." They stood together in the doorway, watching the night, and Grace felt something shift inside her. It was too soon, she knew that. Thomas had only been gone for 3 months, but her heart did not seem to care about propriety or proper mourning periods. Her heart was noticing the way Callum looked at her, gentle and patient and interested. Her heart was remembering what it felt like to be seen as a woman instead of just a widow or a housekeeper or a tragedy. "Callum," she said softly, not sure what she was going to say but needing to say something. He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face took her breath away. He was not hiding anything, not disguising what he felt, and what he felt was written clearly in his eyes, hope and longing and careful restraint all mixed together. "I know it is too soon," Callum said quietly. "I know you are still grieving and I am not trying to rush you into anything. But I need you to know that I care about you, Grace. Not just as a partner, not just as someone who works for me, but as a person I want in my life. And if you need a year or 5 years or forever before you can even think about anything more than friendship, that is fine. I am not going anywhere. I just needed you to know." Grace felt tears prick her eyes again, but they were different tears this time. "I do not know what I am feeling right now. Everything is so mixed up. I love Thomas. I will always love him. But he is gone and you are here, and I am starting to feel things that make me feel guilty and confused." "Do not feel guilty," Callum said firmly. "Love is not finite. You loving your husband does not mean you cannot care about someone else, and caring about me does not mean you loved him any less. Hearts are bigger than we think they are. You are very wise for someone who claims not to be wise," Grace said with a watery laugh. "I am just saying what I wish someone had said to me when my father died and I felt guilty for being happy about anything." Callum reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Take all the time you need, Grace. I will be here." Grace leaned into his touch for just a moment, letting herself have this small comfort. Then she stepped back, needing space to breathe, to think. "I should go inside. It has been a long day. Get some rest. I will lock up out here." Callum's voice was gentle, understanding. Grace walked back to the house alone, her mind spinning. Inside, she changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Thomas and Callum and the strange path her life had taken. 3 months ago, She had been a wife and mother. Now she was a widow and a business partner, standing on the edge of something new and terrifying. But maybe terrifying was not all bad. Maybe terrifying meant alive, meant feeling, meant moving forward instead of staying frozen in grief. Grace touched the wedding ring she still wore, a promise to a man who was gone but not forgotten. "I am trying, Thomas," she whispered to the darkness. "I am trying to figure out how to keep living. I hope you would be proud of me." The months rolled forward into summer, and the ranch thrived under the partnership of Grace and Callum. The cattle were sleek and healthy. The garden Grace had planted was producing more vegetables than they could eat, and the household ran with efficient precision. The hired hands stayed on permanently when Callum offered them year-round positions, which meant more work for Grace, but also more stability for everyone. Grace settled into her role as partner with growing confidence. She started keeping the books, her neat handwriting tracking expenses and income with precision. She negotiated better prices with the feed supplier, pointing out that they were ordering in larger quantities now and deserved a discount. She suggested diversifying their beef sales, marketing to different buyers to get better overall prices, and her strategy paid off handsomely. Callum watched her bloom with obvious satisfaction. He had been right that she was smart and capable, but even he had not anticipated just how good she would be at the business side of ranching. They fell into a pattern of evening meetings where they would discuss the ranch's affairs over coffee at the kitchen table, planning and strategizing together. But there was more than just business between them now. They were becoming friends, real friends who laughed together and argued good-naturedly about small things. Callum taught Grace to ride properly, patient through her initial nervousness about being on a horse. Grace taught Callum to cook more than just basic trail food, and they spent Sunday afternoons together in the kitchen, making bread and talking about everything and nothing. There were moments of tension too, charged silences where they stood too close or their hands brushed and neither pulled away immediately. Grace was increasingly aware of Callum, of his physical presence, and the way he moved through the world. She noticed the strength in his hands, the warmth in his smile, the way his eyes tracked her when he thought she was not paying attention. She knew she was falling in love with him, and it terrified her. Not because she did not want to, but because she did, desperately, and it felt like a betrayal even though Thomas had been gone for 6 months now. The guilt was constant, a low-level ache that never quite went away. One evening in late July, Grace was in the garden pulling weeds when Callum came to find her. The sun was setting, painting everything golden, and the air was heavy with the scent of growing things. "Grace, can we talk?" Callum's voice was serious, and Grace looked up from the tomato plants she had been tying up. "Of course. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. I just need to say something, and I keep putting it off, and I cannot do that anymore." Callum took off his hat, running his hand through his hair in a gesture Grace had learned meant he was nervous. "I know I said I would give you time, and I meant that, but I also need to be honest with you about where I am at." Grace stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "All right." "I am listening." "I am in love with you," Callum said simply. "I did not mean to be, or maybe I did, I do not know anymore. But I am, completely and totally, and it is getting harder to pretend otherwise. I love the way you think. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love watching you in the garden or doing the books or talking to the horses like they are people. I love who I am when I am with you." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. She had known on some level, but hearing it said out loud was different, more real. "Callum, let me finish, please." Callum stepped closer, his eyes earnest and open. "I know you are still grieving. I know I will never replace Thomas, and I am not trying to. but I am asking if there might be room in your heart for me too. Not instead of him, but alongside him. I want to marry you, Grace. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just a business partnership. But only if that is what you want too. I will not pressure you. If you need more time or if you can only ever see me as a friend, I will accept that. But I needed you to know. Grace stood frozen, 100 thoughts and feelings crashing through her at once. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned that would never be. She thought about her boys, about the family she had lost. But she also thought about Callum, about the way he had saved her life and given her a future. She thought about how happy she was when they were together, how right it felt to work beside him and laugh with him and plan their shared future. I am scared, Grace said finally, her voice shaking. I am so scared, Callum. What if I lose you too? What if I let myself love you and then something terrible happens? I do not know if I can survive that again. You cannot live your life afraid of losing people, Callum said gently. He took her hands in his, dirt and all. That is not living. That is just existing. And I know you, Grace Anderson. You are braver than you think you are. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side stronger. I do not feel strong. I feel terrified. Being terrified and doing it anyway is what bravery is. Callum squeezed her hands gently. I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is too uncertain for that. But I can promise you that I will love you every single day we have together. I can promise you that I will be faithful and true and work as hard at our marriage as I do at this ranch. I can promise you that you will never face anything alone again as long as I am alive. Grace looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man who had given her everything when she had nothing. The man who had made her a partner when he could have just hired her. The man who had been patient and kind and let her grieve without trying to rush her through it. The man who loved her enough to risk rejection by being honest about his feelings. I love you too, Grace said, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon or wrong or disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But I do love you, Callum. You make me happy. You make me want to keep living instead of just surviving. The smile that broke across Callum's face was like sunrise, bright and warming. Yeah, Grace confirmed, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time, and Callum pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she shook with the force of her emotions. Is that a yes, then? Callum asked when she had calmed down slightly. Will you marry me? Grace pulled back enough to look up at him, at this good man who loved her. Yes, I will marry you, not to replace what I had, but to start something new, something ours. Callum kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. Grace kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and the coffee he had drunk at dinner and something that was just uniquely him. It was different from kissing Thomas, but different did not mean worse. It was just new, another chapter in a life that was full of unexpected turns. They were married in late August, a simple ceremony in the small church in Sierra Vista with the hired hands and a few neighbors as witnesses. Grace wore a new dress she had sewn herself, cream-colored calico with tiny blue flowers, and she carried wildflowers from the ranch. Callum wore his best suit, and he could not stop smiling, which made Grace smile too. The preacher was an elderly man who had been serving the territory for 20 years, and he spoke about the sanctity of marriage but also about second chances and new beginnings. Grace appreciated that he did not pretend her first marriage had not happened, but rather acknowledged it as part of her story that led her to this moment. Do you, Callum Michael Bennett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish from this day forward? I do, Callum said firmly, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "And do you, Grace Elizabeth Anderson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish from this day forward?" Grace took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Thomas's memory was there with her, but it did not feel wrong. It felt like a blessing, like permission to move forward. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Callum kissed her in front of God and witnesses, and Grace kissed him back, sealing the promise they had made. When they pulled apart, the small congregation was clapping, and Grace realized she was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since the storm. They had a simple reception at the ranch, with food Grace and Callum had prepared together. The hired hands were on their best behavior, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard as the sun set. Grace danced with Callum, his arms strong around her, and she let herself sink into the joy of the moment without guilt or reservation. "How are you doing?" Callum asked as they swayed together to a slow song. "I am good, really good." Grace smiled up at him. "I never thought I would be here, feeling like this again. You gave me my life back, Callum." "We gave each other our lives back," Callum corrected. "I was existing before you came, not really living. You changed that." As the stars came out overhead and the music played on, Grace felt Thomas's presence not as a weight, but as a gentle blessing, a reminder that love did not end just because life did. She had loved him, and she would always carry that love with her. But she loved Callum too, differently but no less truly, and that was allowed. That was good. The first year of their marriage was full of work and growth. Grace moved her things into Callum's room, a larger space at the back of the house with windows facing the mountains. It felt strange at first, sharing a bed with someone who was not Thomas. But Callum was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace for their physical relationship. Their wedding night was tender and careful, both of them nervous for different reasons. Callum because he wanted to be respectful of Grace's grief and past. Grace because it had been so long and everything felt new and slightly scary. But they figured it out together, learning each other slowly, and what they built was honest and real. The ranch prospered under their combined management. They bought a quality broodmare in October, a beautiful bay with good bloodlines and a gentle temperament, and Callum was like a child at Christmas. The mare, which Grace named Bella, was already in foal, and they spent hours discussing their plans for horse breeding. Winter came again, but this time Grace was prepared. The root cellar was full, the livestock were in good condition, and the house was weathertight and warm. When the first snow fell in November, Grace watched it from the kitchen window without fear, safe in the knowledge that she had a home and a partner and a future. She still thought about Thomas and the boys, especially on hard days or when something reminded her of them. But the grief had gentled into something she could carry without being crushed by it. She told Callum stories about them, wanting him to know the people who had shaped her, and Callum listened with genuine interest and respect. "You ever feel like Thomas would disapprove?" Grace asked one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "Honestly, no." Callum pulled her closer, his warmth solid against her back. "From everything you have told me about him, he loved you enough to want you to be happy. I think he would be glad you found someone to take care of you and that you have a good life now." "I hope so," Grace said softly. "I like to think he would like you." "I like to think I would have liked him too." Callum kissed her temple. "Go to sleep, wife. Morning comes early." Grace smiled at the endearment, still not quite used to being someone's wife again, but liking it more every day. She drifted off to sleep feeling safe and content, a remarkable thing given where she had been a year ago. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Bella foaled in April. producing a strong colt with his mother's conformation and his sire's coloring. Callum was beside himself with excitement, and Grace found herself caught up in it too, marveling at the gangly-legged baby who nursed enthusiastically and already showed signs of a curious personality. "We are horse breeders now," Callum said proudly, watching the colt explore his paddock on unsteady legs. "This is the start of something big, Grace. I can feel it." Grace leaned against the fence beside her husband, content. "You were right about this being a good investment. He is going to be beautiful when he grows up. We should think about getting another mare, start building the herd." "Let's see how this season goes first," Grace said practically. "Make sure we can handle the extra work before we expand too much." Callum laughed. "There is that practical streak I love. All right, we will wait. But I am telling you, this is going to be big." In June, Grace realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy, but she attributed it to the hard work of running the ranch. When she finally connected the symptoms and counted back the weeks, she was stunned. She had thought, after losing her boys, that maybe she would not have more children, that perhaps grief had broken something inside her. She told Callum that evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. They had not discussed children, and she did not know if he wanted them or if the idea would make him uncomfortable given her past. "Callum, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the papers he was reviewing, immediately attentive. "What is wrong? You have been quiet all day." "Nothing is wrong, at least I do not think so, I hope not." Grace twisted her hands together. "I am pregnant, maybe 3 months along." Callum stared at her for a long moment and Grace's heart sank, but then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming it into something radiant. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I am sure." Callum was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "That is wonderful, that is amazing, we are going to have a baby." Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You are happy?" "You do not mind." "Mind, Grace, why would I mind? I love you, of course I want children with you." Callum pulled back to look at her seriously. "Are you happy? I know this must bring up complicated feelings about James and Michael." "It does," Grace admitted. "I am scared. I am terrified something will go wrong, that I will lose this baby too, but I am also happy. I want this. I want a family with you." "Then we will be scared and happy together," Callum said firmly. "And we will take every precaution. You will take it easy, no heavy lifting. We will hire someone to help with the housework. Whatever you need." Grace laughed, feeling lighter. "I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time, but I will be careful. I promise." True to his word, Callum hired a girl from town, a teenager named Sarah whose family needed the money, to help with the heaviest housework. Grace continued managing the books and the garden, but let Sarah handle the cooking for the hired hands and the endless laundry. It was strange to have help, but Grace had to admit it was nice to be able to rest when she was tired without feeling guilty about work left undone. Her pregnancy progressed normally, much to everyone's relief. She saw the doctor in Sierra Vista regularly, and he pronounced her and the baby healthy. Callum was attentive to the point of being overprotective, which sometimes made Grace laugh and sometimes made her want to hit him with a pillow. But she knew it came from love. As her belly grew round and obvious, Grace found herself thinking about her lost boys less with pain and more with bittersweet fondness. She told this new baby about them sometimes, talking to her stomach as she sat in the rocking chair Callum had made for her. She told the baby about James's serious nature and Michael's constant giggles, about how they had been good boys who deserved better than they got. "You will have brothers in heaven," Grace whispered. "And if you are a boy, you have a lot to live up to, but no pressure. We will love you no matter what." The baby kicked in response, a strong jab that made Grace laugh. This child was active, always moving, and Grace took it as a sign of health and strength. Callum talked to the baby too, his hand on Grace's stomach, feeling the kicks and rolls. "I am your papa," he would say seriously. "And I am going to teach you about horses and cattle and how to be a good person. Your mama will teach you to be smart and practical and how to make the best bread in the territory." Grace gave birth in February, laboring through a long night with the doctor in attendance, and Callum refusing to leave the room despite the doctor's insistence that childbirth was not something men should witness. Grace did not care about propriety. She wanted Callum there, and he stayed, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth, and telling her she was doing great even when she was swearing at him. The baby was born as dawn broke, his first cries loud and healthy. A boy, red-faced and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked exceptionally well. "A son," the doctor said, placing the cleaned and wrapped baby in Grace's arms. "Congratulations." Grace looked down at her son, at this new life she and Callum had created, and felt her heart expand in ways she had thought impossible. She had loved James and Michael with everything in her, and she had thought that was the end of that kind of love for her. But here was this baby, already loved, already precious, and there was room in her heart for him without taking anything away from the boys she had lost. "Hello, little one," Grace whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Callum was crying openly, something Grace had never seen before. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger, and the baby immediately gripped it, a reflex that made Callum laugh through his tears. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one, superstitious about choosing before the baby was safely born. Callum looked at his son, then at Grace, his eyes full of wonder. "What about Thomas? After your first husband, he should be remembered, Grace. He was part of your life and he gave you James and Michael. I do not mind honoring that." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You would do that?" "Of course, and maybe Michael as a middle name after your youngest, Thomas Michael Bennett, if that is all right with you." "It is more than all right," Grace whispered. "It is perfect. Thank you, Callum. Thank you for understanding." "I love you, Grace. All of you, including the parts that loved before me. That is not a threat. That is just part of who you are." Callum kissed her forehead gently. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Michael Bennett. Your mama and I have been waiting for you." Little Thomas, as they took to calling him, was a demanding baby who wanted to eat constantly and did not sleep much. Grace was exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from being needed and wanted. Callum helped when he could, walking the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night so Grace could get a few hours of sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with obvious besotted amazement. The hired hands were surprisingly gentle with the baby, taking turns holding him when Grace brought him outside, and Sarah proved to be a natural with children, often taking Thomas for walks so Grace could nap. The ranch had become more than just a business. It had become a community, a family of sorts. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, chubby and happy and starting to sit up on his own, Grace felt like she had finally found her footing in this new life. She was a wife and mother again, a business partner, a landowner. She had rebuilt everything the storm had taken from her, not exactly the same but good in different ways. One evening in late summer, Grace and Callum sat on the porch watching the sunset while Thomas played on a blanket at their feet, grabbing his toes and babbling to himself. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, theirs in every way that mattered. "You remember the day we met?" Callum asked, his hand finding Grace's. "Of course. You found me walking south in the snow, half frozen and completely lost." I knew that day that you were someone special. I did not know why or how, but I knew." Callum squeezed her hand gently. "Best decision I ever made bringing you home." "Best decision I ever made was staying," Grace said honestly. She looked at her husband, at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you, Callum Bennett. I love this life we have built. I love our son. I love everything about where we are right now. Even the 3 in the morning feedings," Grace laughed. "Okay, maybe not those, but everything else." Callum pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son discover his fingers for the 100th time with the same fascination as the first. The mountains rose purple in the distance, and the cattle lowed softly in the evening air, and everything was right with the world. The years unfolded in a steady rhythm of seasons and work and love. The ranch continued to prosper, their horse breeding program growing into something significant. Bella produced healthy foals every year, and they added 2 more quality mares, building a reputation for strong, reliable working horses. The cattle herd grew too, and they added more grazing land, purchasing adjoining property when it became available. Thomas grew from a chubby baby into a sturdy toddler and then a bright, curious boy. He had Callum's eyes and Grace's stubborn determination, and he loved everything about ranch life. By the time he was 4, he was already following Callum around like a shadow, learning to handle horses and cattle with a natural ease that made both his parents proud. In the spring, when Thomas was 3, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose. She was smaller than Thomas had been, daintier, with blonde hair that curled and wide blue eyes that took in everything. Where Thomas was rough and tumble, Emma was gentle and thoughtful, preferring to observe before jumping in. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Henry James. He was a happy baby who laughed easily and rarely cried, content to be passed around among the ranch hands who all doted on him shamelessly. Grace sometimes stood in the doorway of the children's room at night, watching them sleep, and marveled at how full her life had become. She still thought about her first boys, still felt the ache of their loss, but it had become part of her rather than all of her. She was allowed to be happy. She was allowed to love these new children without it diminishing what she had felt for James and Michael. Hearts were bigger than most people realized. Callum was an exceptional father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught the children about the land and the animals, about responsibility and hard work. But he also played with them, tickling and chasing and telling silly stories that made them shriek with laughter. Grace often stopped what she was doing to watch him with their children, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in the territory. Other ranchers came to Callum for advice, and buyers sought out their cattle and horses specifically. But more than the financial success, the Bennett Ranch was known as a good place to work, where hands were treated fairly and paid well, where people looked out for each other. Grace's role evolved as the children grew. She still managed the books and made many of the business decisions alongside Callum, but she also became the heart of the ranch, the one everyone came to with problems or celebrations. She was known for her practical advice and her willingness to help, whether it was nursing a sick cowhand or teaching Sarah to read and write so she could get a better position. Sarah eventually married one of the hired hands, a good man named Daniel, and they built a small house on the edge of the ranch property. Grace and Callum stood up at their wedding, and Grace cried happy tears at seeing Sarah so happy. The ranch continued to be a place where people built lives and families, a community rather than just a workplace. When Thomas was 10, Emma was 7, and Henry was 5, Callum surprised Grace with an addition to the house, a large parlor with big windows and comfortable furniture where the family could gather in the evenings. He had been planning it for months, working with a carpenter from town, and Grace was stunned when he revealed it. "You always talked about wanting a place for the family to be together," Callum said, watching her face anxiously. "Somewhere comfortable where we can read and talk and just be. So I made you one." Grace walked through the beautiful new room, taking in the built-in bookshelves and the stone fireplace and the large window seat that overlooked the mountains. It was perfect, exactly what she would have designed if she had known how. "It is wonderful," she said, throwing her arms around Callum's neck. "Absolutely wonderful, thank you." That evening, the whole family gathered in the new parlor for the first time. Callum read to the children from a book of fairy tales while Grace darned socks and simply enjoyed the peace of having everyone together and safe. This was what she had built from the ashes of her old life. A family, a home, a future full of love and possibility. As the children grew older, they each developed distinct personalities and interests. Thomas remained obsessed with the ranch, spending every spare moment with the animals and already showing signs of being an exceptional horseman. Emma loved the garden and started helping Grace with the cooking, showing a real talent for it. Henry was the studious one, always asking questions about everything, constantly wanting to know how things worked and why. Grace and Callum made sure all three children could read and write well, working with them every evening on their lessons. The nearest school was too far for daily travel, so Grace taught them herself, using books ordered from catalogs and her own considerable knowledge. She was determined that her children would have opportunities, that they would be educated and capable of making their own choices in life. The children knew about James and Michael. Grace told them stories about their half-brothers, wanting them to know that they had siblings in heaven who would have loved them. She showed them the carved wooden horse that James had made for Michael, now kept carefully in a special box, and explained what had happened during the terrible storm. "Were you very sad when they died?" Emma asked one evening when she was about 8. They were in the garden together, picking vegetables for dinner. "I was sadder than I thought was possible to be," Grace said honestly. "I thought I might die from how sad I was. But then your papa found me, and he gave me a reason to keep living. And then you and your brothers came along, and I learned that hearts can break and heal at the same time. You still miss them, every single day, but missing them does not mean I am sad all the time. It just means I remember them and love them the same way I love you and Thomas and Henry. Love does not go away just because someone dies, Emma. It just changes shape." Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing this information in her careful way. "I wish I could have met them. They sound nice." "They were very nice. James would have taught you how to fish, and Michael would have made you laugh until your stomach hurt." Grace smiled, the memory bittersweet but no longer agonizing. "But you know what? I think they would be very happy that you and your brothers exist. I think they would be glad I found happiness again." As the years passed, the Bennett family became a fixture in Sierra Vista and the surrounding area. They were known for their honesty, their hard work, and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When drought hit the territory one summer, Callum and Grace opened their water sources to neighboring ranchers whose wells had run dry. When fire threatened another ranch, every hand on the Bennett place rode out to help fight it. Grace became known as someone who could help with difficult births, both human and animal, and she was called out at all hours to attend women in labor or help with struggling livestock. She had a gift for staying calm in emergencies, and her practical knowledge saved many lives over the years. Callum served on the Territorial Council, representing the interests of ranchers and working to improve conditions for everyone. He was respected for his fairness and his willingness to listen to all sides of an issue. Grace was quietly proud of him, of the man he was and the leader he had become. When Thomas was 15, tall and broad-shouldered and looking like a younger version of his father, he came to Callum and Grace with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future and what I want to do with my life." "All right," Callum said carefully. They were in the parlor, the evening sun slanting through the windows. "What have you been thinking?" "I want to stay here. I want to work the ranch with you and eventually take it over when you are ready to step back. This place is home. It is what I love. I cannot imagine doing anything else." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Her firstborn son, this young man who looked so much like Thomas but had Callum's steady temperament, wanted to continue what they had built. It felt like a gift, like proof that they had done something right. "Are you sure?" Callum asked. "You are young yet. There is time to see the world, try other things." "I am sure, Papa. This is where I belong. This is what I want." Thomas looked between his parents earnestly. "I know it is hard work. I know it means long days and constant worry and dealing with weather and markets and all the rest, but I want it. I want to build on what you have created here." Callum looked at Grace, and she nodded, smiling through her tears. "Then that is what we will do," Callum said, his voice gruff with emotion. "We will start teaching you the full business side, all the things you will need to know to run this place someday. But understand, Thomas, this is a partnership. The ranch will belong to all three of you children eventually, and you will need to work together to keep it going." "I understand." "And I will." Thomas smiled, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, both of you, for everything." Emma announced at 13 that she wanted to be a teacher, inspired by the lessons Grace had taught her and her brothers. She wanted to open a school in Sierra Vista so that children in the area would not have to learn at home the way she had. "It is a good dream," Grace told her daughter, braiding her long blonde hair one morning. "But teaching requires more education than I could give you here. You would need to go to a normal school, maybe in Helena or even back east, to get proper certification." "Could I do that? Would you and Papa let me go?" Grace's first instinct was to say no, to keep her daughter close and safe. But she remembered being young and having dreams, and she knew that clipping Emma's wings would only breed resentment. "If that is what you really want, we will find a way to make it happen. You will need to be 16 at least before you go, but we can start planning for it now." Emma threw her arms around Grace's neck. "Thank you, Mama. I will make you proud, I promise. You already make me proud, sweet girl, every single day." Henry remained the scholar of the family, reading everything he could get his hands on and constantly asking questions about science and mathematics and how the world worked. He was fascinated by engineering and talked about building better systems for water management and irrigation. "I want to make things better," he said when he was 12, explaining his latest idea for improving the ranch's water distribution. "I want to solve problems and create solutions. That is what makes me happy." "Then that is what you should do," Callum told him. "The world needs people who think about how to improve things. Your mama and I will support whatever path you choose." As Grace approached 40, she looked at her life with deep satisfaction. She had been married to Callum for 16 years, and they were still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. The ranch was more successful than they had ever dreamed, secure enough that they could afford to send Emma to school and support Henry's education, and eventually pass the whole thing on to Thomas. The children were healthy and happy and growing into good people. Thomas was learning the business with enthusiasm and showing real leadership potential. Emma was studying hard, preparing for the entrance exams for normal school. Henry was already corresponding with a professor at the university in Helena about engineering principles, planning for his own future education. One evening, Grace and Callum took a rare evening to themselves, leaving the children with Sarah and Daniel for the night. They rode out to the ridge where Callum had taken Grace so many years ago, when she was newly arrived and still raw with grief. They sat together on the rocks, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The valley spread below them, the ranch buildings small but solid in the distance, cattle grazing peacefully, everything quiet and settled. "You remember the first time we came up here?" Callum asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "I do. I was so lost then. I did not know what I was doing or where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving or I would give up completely. I am glad you kept moving. I am glad I found you that day in the snow." Callum pulled her closer. "You gave me everything, Grace. A family, a purpose, a reason to build something bigger than just myself. I was just going through the motions before you came. You made me want to really live." "You did the same for me," Grace said softly. "When the snow took everything I had, you gave me your ranch and said it was ours. You gave me a future when I thought I did not have one. You loved me when I did not think I could be loved again. You gave me our children, this life, everything that matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, bright and countless in the darkening sky. Grace thought about the girl she had been at 24, broken and grieving and sure her life was over. She thought about Thomas and James and Michael, gone but not forgotten, always a part of her. And she thought about everything that had come after: Callum, the ranch, their 3 beautiful children, a life full of love and work and purpose. "It is a good life," Grace said finally. "Everything that happened, all the pain and loss and grief, it led me here. I would not change any of it because it made me who I am. It made us who we are." "A very good life," Callum agreed. He kissed her temple gently. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow and build their own lives. Years to work this ranch and make it even better. Years to love each other." "I am looking forward to all of those years," Grace said, meaning it completely. She had lost so much, but she had gained even more. She had learned that the human heart was resilient beyond measure, that love was not a finite resource, that healing was possible even from the deepest wounds. As they rode back to the ranch under the stars, Grace felt at peace. The snow had taken everything she had once, but Callum had given her his ranch, his heart, his life, and said, "It is ours." And together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, something worth every hardship and every tear. The ranch house was warm and welcoming as they returned, lights glowing golden in the windows. Inside, their children would be getting ready for bed, probably giving Sarah a hard time about it. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, Grace was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her here, to this place, to this man, to this life. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and she had come out the other side stronger, fuller, more capable of love than she had ever thought possible. The Bennett Ranch was theirs, truly theirs, built on hard work and hope and a love that had bloomed from the ashes of loss. And that was enough. That was everything. Years continued to roll by in their steady rhythm. Emma left for normal school when she was 16, and though Grace cried as the stagecoach pulled away, she was fiercely proud of her daughter's determination. Emma wrote home regularly, full of stories about her classes and new friends and all the things she was learning. She graduated 2 years later with honors and returned to Sierra Vista to open the school she had dreamed of. The town raised money to build a proper schoolhouse, and Emma taught there for 3 years before a young lawyer named Robert Morrison came to town and swept her off her feet. They married when Emma was 21, and Grace and Callum gave them a piece of ranch land to build their own home. Emma continued teaching even after marriage, believing strongly that women should have opportunities to work and support themselves. Henry left for university at 18, heading to Helena to study engineering. He thrived in the academic environment, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He wrote home with enthusiasm about his projects and ideas, and Callum read his letters with obvious pride, even when he did not fully understand the technical details. Henry graduated and took a position with a company designing irrigation systems for farms and ranches throughout the territory, traveling extensively, but always coming home for important occasions. Thomas stayed on the ranch as he had promised, growing into a capable manager who combined Callum's steady leadership with Grace's business acumen. When he was 22, he married a rancher's daughter named Catherine, a sensible young woman who loved ranch life as much as he did. They lived in the main house at first, Catherine fitting seamlessly into the family dynamic, and Grace was grateful to have another woman to share the work and the company. When Thomas and Catherine's first child was born, a daughter they named Grace after her grandmother, Grace Bennett held her granddaughter and felt the circle complete. She was 51 years old, gray threading through her dark hair, her hands weathered from years of work, but she had never felt more content. "She is beautiful," Grace whispered, rocking the baby gently. "Absolutely perfect." "I hope she grows up to be half as strong as her namesake," Catherine said warmly. She had come to love her mother-in-law deeply, respecting the strength and wisdom Grace embodied. Callum, now 55, was still robust and active, but had started talking about stepping back, letting Thomas take on more of the day-to-day management. He wanted time to enjoy his grandchildren, to travel a little with Grace, to relax after decades of hard work. "We earned it," he told Grace one evening. They were in their bedroom, getting ready for sleep after a long day that had included helping with the new baby. "We built something solid, something that will last. The children can handle it from here." "I know they can," Grace agreed. She climbed into bed beside her husband, settling into the familiar comfort of his presence. "I am proud of them. All three of them have become exceptional people." "They had exceptional parents," Callum said, pulling her close. "You especially." "I do not think you realize how remarkable you are, Grace. You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you turned it into something beautiful." "We did that together," Grace corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." They lay together in the darkness, comfortable and peaceful, a couple who had weathered every storm together and come out stronger for it. Grace thought about the young woman who had walked through the snow, broken and grieving, sure her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that healing was possible, that love could be found even in the darkest places. But maybe she did not need to go back. Maybe living this life, building this family, creating this legacy was message enough. Maybe showing her children and grandchildren that resilience was possible, that love was stronger than loss, that hope could bloom even in the ashes of tragedy. Maybe that was the lesson. Thomas and Catherine eventually built their own house on the property, a beautiful home with a view of the mountains where they raised their growing family. Little Grace was joined by 2 brothers and another sister, and the ranch echoed with the laughter of children again. Emma and Robert had 3 children, and though they lived in town where Emma's school was, they visited the ranch often. Emma's children were different from Thomas's, more bookish and citified, but they all loved coming out to the ranch to ride horses and help with the cattle. Henry married later, in his early 30s, to a woman he met while working on a project in western Montana. They had twin boys who were already showing signs of inheriting their father's analytical mind and curiosity about how things worked. Grace and Callum became the heart of an expanding family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. The ranch house was expanded again to accommodate large family dinners, and Grace presided over these gatherings with joy, loving the noise and chaos of multiple generations under one roof. One Thanksgiving, when Grace was 58 and Callum was 62, the whole family gathered at the ranch. All three children were there with their spouses and children, the house bursting with people and noise and laughter. Grace stood in the kitchen, directing the preparation of the feast with Catherine and Emma's help, watching through the window as Callum and Thomas taught the older grandchildren how to rope fence posts, while the younger ones ran around shrieking with excitement. "Mama, sit down," Emma said, noticing Grace pause to catch her breath. "You have been on your feet all morning. Catherine and I can handle this." "I am fine, just taking a moment to appreciate all this," Grace said, gesturing at the happy chaos around them. "When I think about where I started, where we all started, and look at what we have now, it is almost overwhelming." "You and Papa built something amazing here," Catherine said warmly. "Not just the ranch, though that is impressive enough. But this family, this community, this place where everyone feels welcome and loved. That is your real legacy." Grace smiled, blinking away tears. Catherine was right. The land and the cattle and the horses were important, but the real treasure was the people, the connections, the love that flowed through multiple generations. That was what mattered. That was what would last. Dinner was a boisterous affair with 3 tables pushed together to accommodate everyone. Callum sat at one end with Grace at the other, their children and grandchildren arrayed between them, and Grace felt her heart so full it might burst. This was what the snow had tried to take from her all those years ago, this feeling of belonging and family and home. But she had survived and rebuilt, and what she had now was precious beyond measure. After dinner, when the children were playing and the adults were relaxing, Callum stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted, everyone turning to look at the patriarch of the family. "I just want to say something while we are all together," Callum began, his voice strong and clear. "Your mother and I have been blessed beyond what we ever expected or deserved. We have this ranch, which has been good to us. We have you 3 incredible children and your wonderful spouses. We have these beautiful grandchildren who bring us more joy than they probably realize." He paused, looking down the table at Grace, his eyes full of love and memories. "But the thing I am most grateful for, the thing that made all the rest possible, is the day I found your mother walking through the snow. She was the bravest person I had ever met, and she still is. Everything good in my life started that day. So I want to raise a glass to Grace, to the strongest woman I know, and to the life we built together." "To Grace," everyone echoed, raising their glasses, and Grace felt tears stream down her face as she looked at all these people she loved. This family that existed because she had chosen to keep living when it would have been easier to give up. As the evening wound down and families started heading to their respective homes or guest rooms, Grace and Callum found themselves alone on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the November chill, watching the stars emerge. "That was a good day," Callum said contentedly. "The best," Grace agreed. She leaned against her husband, comfortable and warm despite the cold. "Thank you, Callum, for everything. For saving my life, for giving me your ranch, for loving me even when I was broken, for building this family with me. Thank you for all of it." "Thank you for saying yes," Callum replied. "For staying when you could have left, for taking a chance on me, for making my life infinitely better than it would have been without you. We make a good team, Grace Bennett." "The best team," Grace said, smiling in the darkness. They sat together in peaceful silence, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins of loss. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, full of life and love and future. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept, safe and warm, part of a legacy that would continue long after Grace and Callum were gone. Grace thought about Thomas and James and Michael sometimes still, mostly on quiet nights like this when memories rose unbidden. The grief was gentle now, worn smooth by years of healing, a reminder of love rather than a source of pain. She had loved them completely, and they had shaped who she was, but they were gone and she was here, living the life they would have wanted for her. "Do you ever wonder what they would think of all this?" Grace asked quietly, knowing Callum would understand who she meant. "I think they would be proud of you," Callum said without hesitation. "I think Thomas would be glad you found happiness again. I think your boys would love having all these brothers and sisters and cousins to play with. I think they would be happy that you kept living, Grace. That is what love wants, for the people we love to be happy." Grace nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. She had honored her first family by building a new one, by showing that love was not diminished by loving again, but rather expanded. Her heart was big enough for all of them, the living and the dead, the lost and the found. Years continued their steady march forward. Grace and Callum aged gracefully, slowing down but never stopping entirely. Callum had arthritis in his hands but still worked with the horses he loved. Grace's eyesight dimmed, but she still kept the books, using spectacles and bright light to see the numbers she tracked so carefully. They took longer to accomplish tasks, but accomplished them nonetheless, stubborn and determined as ever. Thomas and Catherine took over the full management of the ranch when Callum was 68, allowing the older couple to truly retire and enjoy their remaining years. Grace and Callum remained in the main house, but it was understood that Thomas was in charge now, making the decisions and carrying the responsibility. "It is strange," Callum admitted to Grace one evening, "not being in charge anymore, but also freeing. I do not miss the worry, the constant pressure. I am content to let Thomas handle it. He is ready. He is more than ready. He is doing a wonderful job." Grace smiled at her husband. "We raised good children, Callum. That is our real accomplishment." They spent their days quietly, enjoying simple pleasures. Callum worked in the workshop he had built, crafting furniture and toys for his grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had started arriving as the oldest grandchildren married and began families of their own. Grace tended a smaller garden, manageable for her aging body, and spent hours each day reading or working on needlepoint, her hands still nimble despite the years. But their greatest joy was time together, just the two of them, talking and remembering and enjoying the peaceful twilight of a life well lived. They took slow walks around the property, Callum's hand steady on Grace's arm, stopping often to rest and admire the view or watch the horses, or simply breathe in the Montana air they both loved. "We have been married 42 years, Callum said one evening as they sat on the porch watching another sunset. He was 76 now, Grace was 72, and both of them felt every one of those years in their creaking bones and slower movements. "Best 42 years of my life," Grace said honestly. "Even with all the hard times, even with the losses and the struggles, I would not change a single thing because it brought me here to this. I love you, Grace Bennett. I loved you from that first day when I found you walking through the snow, and I have loved you more with every day since. I love you too, Callum. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You were my second chance at life, at love, at happiness. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They kissed gently, an old couple who had weathered every storm together and come through still standing, still in love, still partners in every way that mattered. Callum passed away in his sleep 3 years later, at 79, peaceful and painless in the bed he had shared with Grace for over 4 decades. Grace woke to find him gone, his hand still in hers, his face peaceful. She sat with him for a long time, crying softly, grateful that he had not suffered but devastated to lose the other half of herself. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been fair and kind, and respected by everyone who knew him. Grace accepted their condolences with grace, leaning on her children and grandchildren for support. She was 75 years old and had lost a husband for the second time, but she knew how to survive grief now. It was an old, terrible friend. She did not die of her grief this time, though part of her wanted to follow Callum into whatever came next. But she had children who needed her, grandchildren who wanted her stories, great-grandchildren who needed to know their family history. She had a life to live still, even if the shape of it had changed once again. Grace lived another 7 years, sharp-minded and determined until almost the very end. She spent her time with family, telling stories about Callum and Thomas and the early days of the ranch. She made sure all the grandchildren knew their history, where they came from, the sacrifices and hard work that had built the life they enjoyed. She told them about the terrible winter when the snow took everything, about the young cowboy who had saved her life, about how the Bennett ranch had grown from nothing into the thriving enterprise it was now. She told them about Thomas and James and Michael, making sure those boys were not forgotten, that their brief lives mattered and were remembered. "Love is the only thing that lasts," Grace told her great-granddaughter Emma, named after her grandmother, on one of her last lucid days. "Buildings fall down, money gets spent, land gets sold. But love, real love that echoes through generations. Your great-grandfather Callum taught me that. He loved me when I was broken, and that love healed me and created all of this, all of you. Remember that, sweet girl. Love is what matters." Grace Bennett passed away peacefully in her sleep at 82, surrounded by family who had gathered when it became clear the end was near. She was buried next to Callum on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a view of the mountains and the valley and everything they had loved. The Bennett ranch continued to thrive for generations, passing from Thomas to his children and then to their children, each generation building on what came before. The story of Grace and Callum became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of resilience and love and second chances. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up, when they chose love over despair, when they said, "It is ours," and meant it with every fiber of their being. And on winter evenings when the snow fell soft and peaceful over the Montana landscape, the Bennett family still gathered in the house that Callum built and Grace made a home, telling stories about the cowboy who gave a grieving woman his ranch and said, "It is ours," and the woman who was brave enough to accept that gift and build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Their love story became the foundation of everything that followed, proof that even in the darkest times, hope and healing were possible, that love could bloom even in the coldest winter, and that the human heart was capable of holding infinite amounts of love, loss, and courage all at once. The end.